Welcome to Tell Us a Story, the podcast dedicated to the stories that connect us through our shared life experiences, as well as the stories that reveal the sometimes stark differences. Only by truly listening to one another can we bridge the gaps that divide us, thereby fostering empathy, respect, and kindness with one another. In this episode, we hear from Athar Rafiq. He shares the sometimes hidden costs borne by those who choose to immigrate to a new country, as well as those forced to flee their home country, becoming refugees.
My earliest memory of coming to the U.S. was probably spring of 1967, about 56 years ago. And the reason I remember it was spring because I was enrolled in the last 3 months of my middle school. I came in and was enrolled in 7th grade. And so our story would be similar to many other immigrants and refugees, especially because you arrive in a foreign country. We were fortunate enough that we spoke the language. That was totally due to my dad's sacrifice earlier when we were in Africa. And he insisted that we go to a Catholic school there so that we would be fluent in English. But here, arriving 56 years ago, one of the speakers I was listening to, I think a professor from one of the colleges, he says, the days are long and the years fly by, is that our journey is perhaps long and arduous, but similar to what a lot of other refugees go through. And my parents, they were employees of the Pakistani Foreign Service. My dad was an administrative assistant, basically clerical position, speechwriter, etc. But in 1971, then he was transferred to Turkey, and we all moved to Turkey. And that's when we realized I could not go to the university in Ankara, Turkey. He had to send me back for me to continue college here. I wanted to study mechanical engineering, so he wrote a letter to my high school drafting teacher, Mr. Sidney Goldman, and asked if he could help. And Mr. Goldman took me in. I didn't have a place to live, and so here's my high school Jewish, I should emphasize, Jewish high school teacher giving me a place to live in his house. And then a few months later, my dad had enough money collected to send my younger brother back to the States because he felt that I was here all alone and I was quite miserable, and my younger brother would at least help me settle down. So there are two of us here. I was probably at that point 17, and my younger brother was 15. Mr. Goldman couldn't keep us for a long time, so we then moved out of his place to another location. And I would have to work generally the night shifts. My dad had suggested that I work in restaurants, so I would get at least 2 meals. I would get a meal before I started and get a meal before I left, and that way I didn't have to buy food. We never realized when I left Turkey at that point that I would never really go back to Pakistan where I was born for a very long, long time. And then in the mid-70s, or 1974 to be exact, I received a call from my dad who had just arrived at JFK, and he said, "I'm taking a cab. What is your address, and do you have money for the taxi?" He had traveled from Ankara, Turkey to Frankfurt, Germany with my mom and my youngest brother by bus because they did not have enough money to fly from Ankara. And of course, my dad was unemployed, mom was unemployed. I was working, but not enough. My mom and dad had grown up in India, so this was their second time being refugees. They had gotten married, and like every young married couple, they had a lot of things they were looking forward to doing. And then India got independence, and they were forced to migrate from where they had grown up and gotten married to Pakistan, Karachi, Pakistan. The reason he came back to the U.S. in 1974 is that had been in Turkey for 3 years, and he had been in the United States for 3 years before that. And the rule was that after you had done 2 simultaneous postings, as they're called, abroad, missions, that you would come back to Pakistan for a year or 2. So his friend had telegrammed him while he was in Turkey that I just saw your transfer papers, and since you're an Indian immigrant, you'll be forced to resign or retire, and you'll lose your international passport. So you might want to just go to the US and apply for residency there. Because once he goes back to Pakistan, there's no way he would be able to travel at all, and we would be stuck here in the US. And we would not be able to travel to see him either. You know, it sounds fairly simplistic that, okay, he made a choice to not go back. But the irony of it is that when he left India, he left his parents behind and his siblings. And with the money that he was making in Pakistan, he was supporting, his wife and me. So he was also trying to save enough money to get his whole family moved to Pakistan from India, which they did. But, he lost the extended family. We all grew up in these communities and tribes where you have uncles and aunts that go back hundreds and hundreds of years. And that community was lost, so they thought they would rebuild it in Pakistan. And then when he started working for the Foreign Service, he felt, okay, the money's good, but I'm home every 3 years, and I get to see my parents and my siblings. In 1974, he faced a very hard choice. He had to come either to the U.S. and, be with his children, which meant giving up all his extended family back in Pakistan. He already was very sad about his life in India that he had given up as a child. And so there's this big sort of hole in your heart where you're longing for something and you just are never able to experience that. It's hard to explain sometimes, but what happens sometimes, I have that happen when I smell sometimes a diesel engine, smoke from a diesel engine. It takes me back to this bus stop in Karachi because, the buses used to be smelling of this diesel fume. And so I think back, I said, okay, that's how my dad felt about some of the things that he talked about. And so when he came in 1974, he had sort of made that decision that he would have to give up that second attempt of trying to create a family and all back again. And so we were back here again as a nuclear family. And in the 1970s in New York, there were not a lot of people from India, Pakistan, so it was just no Indian Pakistani community that you could fit into. Right now and today, I see that with Afghani refugees as well. If we are able to communicate in Urdu or Pashto or Dari, you suddenly see these faces light up. And we're like, oh my God, you speak that. So we as immigrants and refugees, we pay a massive price on an emotional, intellectual level. And just a couple of days ago, I was talking to my brother. I was telling him, Dad was fairly laid back. What made us become such, crazy workaholics to try and get everywhere? And I think because we had no place to live and we were so suddenly thrown into this atmosphere, no food, no place to live, that it really sort of was a very scary place. And so you never want to go back there, and you work really, really hard to get out of there. And then you're constantly trying to prove to somebody else and yourself that, you're better, you can make it happen. And striving for that perfection on one side, and then trying to cover up all this turmoil of longing for certain things makes it a very challenging place to live. As much as we're grateful and sort of patriotic about the American dream, it has its gaps for us. Sometimes when we travel abroad and we hear the call to prayer, it's just breathtaking for us. Those are the things we will always miss. And yes, we can travel somewhere and get that, or we can go to some of the bigger cities and get our local food, but it's not the same as it was your native town where you've been there or your family's been there for generations. Once in a while, and I make yogurt at home, and I just thought to share this, is that when I make the yogurt, once in a while it turns out, and just the taste of that, I find I'm going back to the fellow who would normally sell yogurt in those days. Of course, this is 50 years ago, would be riding a bike with a clay pot in the back, and the yogurt would have been set for a day or two in that clay pot, and he would serve that out. So it was that kind of little thing that you could just buy a small serving of yogurt from the bicycle vendor. My mom, once in a while, would, we used to make flatbread for dinner all the time. And on special meals, she would still make the flour, knead the flour, and that she would send me to the local tandoor. And I would carry the flour to the tandoor, and that fellow would make the bread as naans instead of flatbread. And he would keep a little bit of the kneaded flour as payment. And I miss that bartering. And then that smell of running home with that hot naan to make sure I got it back there in time so that it was still hot. And I miss the courtyard we used to sort of sometimes sit in because of the tropical climate. Sometimes in the evenings you would just hose down the courtyard and the summer heat would just cool from that evaporating water, and you would sit and sleep outside under the stars, literally. 20 years ago, we went back to Pakistan, and I visited my distant relatives in Quetta. But now we could no longer sleep on the roof. We're just not accustomed to it. As a children, we would all climb up to the roof in the summer and sleep on the roof and, watch the stars. But those are some of the things. The day-to-day routine, mainly the call to prayer and this ability to just speak your language on a day-to-day basis, your native language. I'm a native English speaker, but still sometimes you long for that. But we're happy, right? So we don't start all over again. I think one of the things I did want to talk about is that there's this massive deficit in belongings. I have no childhood friends, from kindergarten. I have no books or belongings that I had when I was in elementary school or high school or anything like that. I mean, we have some pictures, but that would be about it. And I'm comfortable with, of course, I'm very comfortable with where we're living and what I'm doing. And I would not fit anywhere else. I mean, so when my dad was here for about 20 years in the 90s, he decided he was going to move back to Pakistan. He just felt so bad. And so he decided he would move back to Karachi, Pakistan, where his brothers were living. He sold everything, and meaning like he sold his furniture, his house, and packed up everything and moved back to Pakistan. In less than a year, he was back. And it was very sad because home was no longer home. It had changed. And he didn't fit in anymore. He was now an American, and he was an outsider, and he was treated that way. And so this is the story of the refugees and the immigrants. Sometimes we don't realize we're not here by choice. Very few of us are here by choice. We're here, yes, because of the opportunities and higher quality of life, for sure. But there's a significant price to pay for that. And not that we're minding the price, but I think once in a while we should, when we're on the other side as locals, we should understand that refugee that's out there or that immigrant that's out there, they've left a lot behind. I have a fellow who sometimes will help here in the yard, and he says he misses his mom, and he's been here 20 some odd years, and he still misses his mom. I mean, she's alive, thank God, and he talks to her, but, can you imagine? He just wants to see his mom, and he can't. So that's where I was going. My dad's parents passed away, and he wasn't able to see them. I was not able to get to know them as grandparents or anything like that. And so I tell my students sometimes, I said, if you have grandparents who are still alive, spend time with them. It's very important for us to have that oral history that goes back generations. And it's important, even if they're repeating their stories, for you to know those stories so that you can carry that oral history forward. I don't think sometimes we give enough importance to these oral histories that, we've grown up with. I don't know if I could speak for all immigrants, but I can say definitely for myself, my parents and my in-laws, we were clearly and are clinically sort of depressed from this loss that we've encountered. We are in perpetual grieving for that loss. And, certainly we all took medications. I still take medications for that. But that grieving process never really ends. You make some sort of I don't want to say you make peace with it. You kind of make a deal that, okay, I will let you in and, we'll commiserate for an hour a day or something like that, and then I have to put you aside and we'll move on with life. So there is that emotional grief that continues forever, I think. My dad was forever grieving. He never really lost that or able to make peace with it. And as he got older, as I'm getting older now, I just turned 69 some time ago, I feel what he was feeling that I didn't understand earlier, is that somehow you wish it would be a little bit easier to go back and forth between the cultures. A couple of weeks ago, we went to Toronto for just a few days. We drove up and drove back. And, we had a blast in Toronto because there's some neighborhoods in Toronto you would swear you were back in Southeast Asia. People are speaking the language and the food and all. It's a nice stopgap, but we're always mourning that loss. And I think that's just the way it has to be. I don't think there's any way we can fix it. I'm very, very grateful that the American society's strength is this ability to incorporate and welcome immigrants and refugees, not necessarily always with open arms, but the average American definitely welcomes refugees and immigrants with open arms. And that is something I experienced in many different towns, wherever I went. Even afterwards, when I was working, I was able to find people that welcomed me no matter which city I was in. It's more important for the refugees to build relationships. And what I tell a lot of times to our friends is, don't go and hang out with your own communities, people from back home, because then you're really creating a problem for the average American not to get to know you. You look like you're an outsider and you behave like an outsider. And that feeds into the broader sense of these are outsiders, they'll never fit in, because we kind of feed that. Wherever we go, we want to move to a bigger city and then find a neighborhood where everybody speaks the same language, eats the same food, and we try to recreate that village from back home. And that's why I do like the term melting pot, in the sense that we do want to give the best of us and absorb the best of what our host country has to offer. It is perhaps the best country in the world for immigrants and refugees. I don't think any other country comes close to what the United States offers in terms of upward mobility. And not necessarily just economic upward mobility. I'm talking about being accepted. For example, we have friends who we meet occasionally, and we meet like as if we've been known each other for decades, even though we might have just met a few years ago. So I think, in that sense, certainly we are home. This is our home, and we feel at home. And it's been wonderful for our children, and certainly we want to continue that legacy of giving back that other people gave to us.
Thank you for listening to Tell Us a Story. We hope this episode will encourage you to have a conversation with an immigrant or refugee in your community to learn more about their story and the challenges they face and how those challenges may be similar or different from your own. Please review the show notes for more information about this podcast or visit us at tellusastory.info.